Carlton King, the former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe for free.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, a show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations. But actually, as I say every week, to be fair, majors on the aspect of geopolitics in all its forms. But particularly, we look at what you, the public, and I don't care what country you're in, get fed by my esteemed colleague, see she's coming up every week, esteemed colleague in the media. So basically, I think I'm right in saying, and I'm sure Firgas can help me, that what you basically get, see, hear, feel is actually through the filter of journalism, which my esteemed colleague is a major player therein and has been for some numerous years. However, I did say about 2 weeks back that when I did a special, I did a critical thinking one, which I did, yours truly alone, on what I called the gender wars. And it looked at everything, but gender was the ideal prism to look through it from because of the various behaviours. And also because, let's face it, in most countries, women are at least, I think I'm right in saying 51% of the population, at least, because I think in many places it's actually more. So why wouldn't we look at how that affects, particularly in the West, the Western perspective these days? And I said that I was pretty much sure that my colleague, my partner in crime, would have something to say about this. So I don't know what she's going to say, but I'm going to let her speak on the issue. So, good day to you, Firgas. How are you today?
Always a pleasure, Carlton. Always a pleasure. But I love how you started this off when you used the phrase "fed into," because I know that you had a terrible lunch.
That's true. That is true.
Let's just start by talking about your lunch. I think it's important. What did you have for lunch, and why was it so terrible?
Well,
I had avocado on toast. I'm just going to say.
You see, there you go. You see, for you, more sensible. What we did, I went out with friends of mine, and we went to an Italian restaurant, and I thought Italian. Okay, let's look at what they're putting on. So they talk about, and they said garlic bread. First of all, it wasn't in Italian or in Spanish. It was in English. So they said bread garlic. Okay, fair enough. That's one run. And then they said bread and cheese. Okay, not bad. Let's work with that. I'm thinking Italian, bruschetta, bread and cheese, blah, 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 whatever. Yeah, maybe they give us the menu that I had on the English. So then I look a little bit further and I run down there and I see a lot of the things which I thought, Italian. And I actually said to the guy, I said, is this proper? Because I'm going to go with your bruschetta type garlic bread, but he said, well, not garlic bread. We've got cheese or garlic. I said, okay, cheese then. Okay, because I thought it would be too. Great, so we've gone down that route. So then I said, and people could have salad or whatever else. So then I said, you've got pizza on here. Now, I like pizza, but only if it's proper pizza Italiano. thin pizza base, etc., done the Italian style. Yo, this is Italian restaurant, proper pizza, of course it is. So I get this pizza when it comes out. First of all, the garlic bread or bread cheese was basically bread. So like if you will, a French pan with a bit of cheese on it. And the cheese was not an Italian cheese at all. It was tasteless cheese, I thought, personally. Again, it's all personal, isn't it? And then the pizza, I thought, yeah, that'll be better. So we look at the pizza, it comes out. And I'm telling you, I will be surprised. And he was saying to me, we're Italian, we make the base here, blah, blah, blah. Right, okay, great. So, frankly, any of the big companies you get in the UK would do a better pizza. And that's saying something, right? This thing was as though it was bought from some, I don't know, Iceland, not calling Iceland down, of course, in any way, shape or means, but from some Iceland type thing that they've frozen and then just reheated. Terrible. So for me, big miss.
Now, what I love, because this is how we're starting the conversation, what I love is what I've just done with you is a Jedi mind game, right?
Yep.
I've just played feminine energy to you to ask you about your lunch, and you've just gotten massively angry about your pizza.
Yep.
Which is masculine energy.
Interesting.
So I'm prefacing this whole conversation.
Yep.
That I have lots and lots to say about your previous podcast about gender, but we've just shown that, I mean, to paraphrase that, to subtext that awful 80s book, Men Are From Mars movie.
I knew you were going to say that. I didn't want to jump in. I knew that. Yeah, right, and I think it's true.
But right now, I'm gonna deep dive into quite a lot of the things that you spoke about on your previous
critical thinking one. Yeah.
When you threw down the gauntlet to me, I felt.
Yes.
I felt quite honoured. Because it's almost like you were asking me to do my own critical thinking, which that's. But before we jump into that, let's just quickly talk about the UK government elections that are imminent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you obviously referenced the right to vote and the suffragettes, etc., and we'll come on to all of that later. But right at the moment, unless you can prove that you're a UK resident and citizen, you can't vote anyways. So let's just address that before we deep dive into gender.
Absolutely. Do you want me to hit first, or are you going to?
No, you hit
come
first.
from where you are.
Okay. You go first.
Okay. So, as a special branch officer, going back some years when there was a branch before 2006 in the Metropolitan Police Service, and I'll put an angry man element to it, which had been a service for over 120, 25, 130 years, which was very, very good at what it did, expertise, and they wanted to take that expertise away because I think in the modern era, they kind of were saying something like, it's too exclusive. You shouldn't have this organisation. It's too exclusive. So they got rid of it. Anyway, part of its duties was everything political. All types of political policing in any way, shape or means, terror, subversion. And obviously, what more political than the right to vote? So we dealt with the Voter Act that there was there and the suppression thereof, etc., that there could be, voting rights. To be fair, I'm trying to remember an occasion when we actually did anything on it. So that would suggest to me that I'm still trying to think as I'm saying it. That would suggest to me that actually the right to vote wasn't abused that much, or we didn't see it, or it wasn't reported to us by the voting officers that actually do the vote. You've got the guys and gals who have the task of assessing whether the vote has been carried out correctly in the United Kingdom, and to my understanding, I think it is extremely rare that somebody's doing something against the right to vote as a singular individual. Okay, that said, is it right that you should have to prove who you are when you vote? I would kind of say yes. Now, how does that become problematic? It probably becomes problematic because we in the United Kingdom don't have ID cards. Whether that means we're more free than anybody else, I really doubt, to be fair. But we don't. If it means that you need a picture ID, well, to be fair, you frankly need a picture ID for most things now. And it's often as easy as just going to, you know, those old-fashioned things they used to call libraries, going to the library and getting a card or whatever with your picture on it. Or train station, or obviously a driver's license, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think they'll even take things like your last bill, if it's some sort of electricity bill, gas bill that shows that you live there, so you're voting correctly within your area. So I don't actually think it's that difficult to get some ID. I think if you're not going to be bothered to get some ID, it means you don't probably really want to vote, is what I would say. I don't think it's a difficult thing.
No, but Carlton, given the apathy to vote in the UK anyway, now that look, let's just call this out. Like the Tories have just created another barrier to voting, which means that those people who are happy to vote, i.e. the people that you'd arguably think would vote Tory,
that may vote Tory, yeah,
will go out and vote Tory, right? And those people who are considering other options, media-wise, like responsible media-wise, you know, we've gone through many decades of encouraging young people to vote, making it easy, making it cool, having cool ambassadors talking about how great it is to vote, talking about making change. You know, voting should be as important to a younger generation as going on a climate change march. But now there's that extra barrier in there. And to be honest, because of Brexit and because of the pandemic, a lot of those younger people don't have a passport. You know, they might be eligible to vote, but they don't have a passport, and they maybe don't have a driving license, because where are they going to go or whatever. I mean, I think it's a very, it's a very bold decision from the government, but it was obviously a decision that had an outcome in mind.
Right. What I'd say is, clearly, it isn't something that's negative to the Tory, they think. As I said before, we used to do Representation of the People's Act in the branch, and I can't remember people voting several times. I'm not saying it didn't happen. In some communities, there was murmurings of it, but I'm not going to say it didn't happen. That said, if you're so apathetic that you can't, and it's not just a driver's license or a passport, or it's actually, they made it quite easy. There's quite a few things you can get with your picture on it that has nothing to do with the more difficult things. Yes, for those who are not interested, it's just another thing to stop you from voting. So the bigger question may well be, is should we do, as in some other countries, Belgium comes to mind, where you have to vote? If not, you commit an offence. You know, these are all the kind of things you can talk about.
Well, I
but
agree.
If we're apathetic,
look. This beautifully circles back to what you were talking about in your previous, critical thinking episode about the suffragettes and about, the women's right to vote and all the rest of it. So look, this circles back to where we're going, and I agree with you. Your listeners might know I was brought up as a feminist. You know, I was brought up to think positively about women's rights. The UN says gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls is not just a goal in itself, but the key to sustainable development, economic growth, and peace and security. You spoke about lots of important issues, and we can unwrap them and talk about them individually and address them if you want. But for me, like what women's rights represents, women's suffrage, which you obviously spoke about, sexual and reproductive rights. You know, so everyone should be able to make decisions about their own body. Like, we should think about anti-abortion and contraceptive rights and you know, how that plays out geopolitically. Then and marriages and arranged marriages and all of that. Freedom of movement, you know, let's think about that as well. But and we will talk about all of these things, and look, you know, we can talk about, we can kind of go through and we can name check countries and all the rest of it. But one thing that I would say is, and I know you've had her as a guest on your show, which is really interesting. If my 9-year-old self would have been flying a flag for women's suffrage and every sort of women's rights and feminism and all the rest of it. And my agency, DAPS, has just commissioned a white paper to explore the role of menopausal women in the workplace. And the findings are actually really, really interesting. And we've been working with Dr. Rachel Taylor, who you've had as a guest on your show.
Absolutely.
And one thing that I've learned from Dr. Rachel, which is a really interesting and exploratory point, and it might actually be a steer on many of these conversations. But she said, and I'm gonna preface this by saying the white paper that that we're shortly to deliver is really interesting about the fact that many women reach a certain age and then have to quit their jobs or aren't supported at work, or, you know, have no one to talk to, or have no support lines, or whatever, you know, because they reach that certain stage of life that every woman goes through at that certain point, right? Now, Dr. Rachel said, and this is quite a powerful statement, and it really made me think. She said, why do women need to have it all? Now, what she didn't mean was, she didn't mean why should women not be able to vote. She didn't mean what she meant was, what we've been looking at is the stature of women, you know, how they pan out in terms of equality in society, you know, like, am I as good as the man that's doing the job that's next to me? Am I getting the same pay as the man that's doing the job that's next to me? Am I getting the same respect as the man that's next to me? Right. But what if we were just to circle back to biology and neuroscience, you know? And what Dr. Rachel said, which is actually very interesting, is that, I mean, is that, okay, let's go back to cave times, whatever you call that, Neolithic times, whatever. Men, if we were to say, and again, like, you know, no disrespect to transgender listeners, but if we were to say that men were hunter-gatherers and women were nurturers, and that biologically we were sort of set out to do those things, when did we had a podcast that, like, a way back when you said something really interesting. You said, you know, back in your grandmother's age, you could have had like 5 or 6 kids and raised them on a one-person salary. And it was only when, you know, such and such next door started wanting this and such next door, you know, it was all about, like, you know, getting better and better, and then the 80s hit, and then, you know. But if you were to circle back to simpler times, what if, like one interesting question, a really interesting question, I feel is has the woman's role been defined by trying to compete with men? Right. So alternatively, just a thinking point, like as a starter for 10, because we have just done this menopause survey, right? So did you know, Carlton, that the only mammals, apart from humans, where the menopause is part of the culture, where menopause is even a thing, are killer whales, right? So the idea, that the societal idea that we seem to have tragically lost is that elder humans are should be there to educate and inform the younger generation, i.e. the grandchildren, whilst the parents are able to go out and hunt and gather, or whatever. I mean, that's sort of biologically how we're built, according to Dr. Rachel, which is incredibly informative. But killer whales replicate this same lifestyle model, which is really interesting, isn't it? And also the other thing, another really, really interesting thing is that did you know that crone, the word crone, means crowned in Anglo-Saxon, right? So in society, in Anglo-Saxon society, a crone was the crowned woman of society. She was so that woman who, that grandmother was there to impart her wisdom. Hag, the word hag comes from holy. It means holy, right? Witch, even the word witch comes from the word wise. Wit is in Anglo-Saxon was wise. All these women were esteemed in their communities, right? So what I'm asking you, when we were when you were talking about about gender equality, and when I look at gender equality and what that stands for, and on all of those things that we need to address, human rights in Argentina, abortion in Ireland, women's rights in Poland, reproductive rights in South Korea. I mean, like goodness, when we need to look at all of these things, if there was an opportunity to just rewrite the book based on biology rather than social stature, rather than parity, rather than us needing to be equal, right? If we were to look at the biology of humans, would this be a different narrative?
Okay, I mean, I hope that you and listeners got from it that my position was never and isn't against equal rights for women, whatever that is, because I also tied it to equal rights for people of different races, etc., etc. That's not what my argument was for. My argument was, and I hope I articulated it correctly, was that who is making the decision as to what equal rights are? And I'll explain why that was important.
But the thing is, Carlton, look, no, I'm just going to stop you before you like dismiss yourself, because like all of this comes from what you were saying.
Absolutely.
You brought in what you said was that rights to women are so different across classes and across
correct. That's what I was going to back into.
Across classes and across cultures, right? But the thing I'm asking you to think about is, if you imagine that all of those problems across classes and cultures could be reinvented if we looked at the biology of women,
absolutely,
without being too sort of graphic, but do you know what I mean? If we looked at the biology of men and women,
we are in total agreement. Absolutely. And this is what I was going to say. What I'm kind of saying is that our idea of women's rights has been hijacked by a certain type of woman, right?
Yes,
and it's a woman of a certain class.
You're referring to, and I know exactly who you mean, but yes,
absolutely,
exactly.
That's the point. It's been hijacked. So the problem then is it's not equal rights, it's what they perceive to be equal rights. So I'll give you three examples actually, very quickly. One was I was discussing with some people some time back, and they were talking about women breastfeeding. And the articulation was, well, the fact that women are breastfeeding is something which Tory-type men like because it keeps a woman tied to hearth and home. And my argument with that is that's nonsense. There's nothing stopping a woman from breastfeeding and basically saying, okay, I can have the time to breastfeed in my work period because that's set aside, or I can express milk off and do it that way, or whatever. There's many ways around these things. It's not a singular that, we'll give them all formula milk because otherwise it ties us as women to the children. So that was the argument, that the Tory man is utilising that. Now, I'm not going to argue, which is now another argument, I'm not going to argue that there aren't men who have utilised the position of women to put them on a straight and narrow, which, by the way, I believe, and this is quite interesting because you get both sides of the same thing. Prostitution for many women of a certain level is that it's outrageous, nasty, no woman wants to do this, it's all forced upon women. Men of that same ilk say exactly the same. But when you speak to prostitutes, and I used to play in clubs, etc., I can remember doing a club when I was a young fella. I'd be about 17, whatever, and I was playing in a club. It used to be one day. It used to do strippers. And when you ask those girls, are you forced? No, I'd just make better money. I'd rather do this than work in Tesco or somewhere, right? So you're taking away a woman's right to choose because a certain type of woman doesn't think it's the right thing to do because they've never had to make that choice. So what I'm saying is, and I'll give you an even better one. As you know, the war in the East, Second World War, and the war in the West were two completely different wars. The war in the West was dealt with under gentlemen's rules. So when people got caught, they were put into camps, and those who tried to escape were put into Colditz Castle. They escaped once or twice, and they were put into Colditz Castle, and they were kept there by the Germans. Right. On the Eastern Front, you tried to escape, and frankly, you'd just be exterminated. You'd just be shot and killed because you're an Untermenschen. They felt nothing of you. Also, what they would do is they had a thing called the Kommissarsbefehl in 1941, and a commissar was a Red Army officer who was a commissar in the Red Army whose job it was to make sure that people worked towards communism and make sure that people functioned in a communistic way in the Red Army. The order was given. Well, what happened is, that's for the order to be given, was that a SS soldier, a Feldwebel, which means a sergeant, he basically saw this one guy who was a commissar, just shot him on the field of battle. The Wehrmacht, regular German army, arrested this one guy, and the military police arrested him, and basically said, you're going to go on trial. Now, this guy, who was an SS guy, wrote to Himmler to get to Hitler and say, this commissar, when I saw him, this Untermenschen, he turned my stomach when I saw him doing what he was doing, so I had to shoot him out of hand on the field. So apparently it's gone up to Hitler, and Hitler says, what is this man being done for? Because obviously for killing somebody on the field is death. What's he been? Rubbish. He should get the Iron Cross for what he's done, right? So apparently they gave him the Iron Cross. And from then on, an order came out from Central Command that basically any commissar, any Roten Red commissar, should be shot on the field of battle, no question, should be taken out. Right. Now, I mentioned that to you because there's another type of Soviet soldier who that happened to. Do you know who that was? Women. What they basically said is, if you find Hexenweib, as they call them, as you just mentioned before, witch women, if you find them on the field battle, you're allowed to just top them straight away, exterminate women who are fighting, because that's not a womanly thing to do, to fight on the field of battle. The Soviet army had many, many women fighting on the front line. Not like ours, on the front line, as snipers, as pilots, as regular infantry troops, etc., etc., etc. And these people, when caught by SS, would just generally, bang, shot dead, finished. So those are two people who they dislike. The commissar pushing forward the perspective of communism, but any woman fighting. So this shows you something. So these are bodies. Society does hold back or does put perspectives on women. As I said to you, the prostitute, oh, she's terrible. Because they fear people like that. They feared the prostitute who could earn her own money, right, without having any recourse to men. It's a fear, isn't it? So I'm not one who's arguing any different. What I'm saying is
exactly. What I'm suggesting here is, Carlton, is that we reinvent the world right now, right?
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, are there any countries where men can be men and women can be women?
Interesting one.
Right. Now, look, I am to your listeners. If your listeners are starting to get panic attacks or whatever, look. I mean, I was brought up as a feminist, but and I completely, I'm very much in that camp. Dr. Rachel Taylor, if you guys want to follow her website is unbroken.me. She's very interesting, and she also has a podcast. But she talks about the biology of and the physiology, right? And this isn't about a conflict or a lack of power on either side. This is about, if we could reinvent the world where men do what they do and women do what they do, and is there a geopolitical model that exists that people could copy? Or, I mean, can we? I mean, one thing I always think is, and I'm a huge supporter of Amnesty International, but they talk a lot about about sexual threat and the real danger that there is there. And I often think that sort of gender-based violence in many countries, has roots in other situations, like Nigeria, for example. Like that there's a military. There are some situations where it hasn't been called out yet, I guess, I suppose, where rape or
I think you learn that in South Africa.
Yeah.
In the favelas. Not favelas, they don't call them favelas, they call them
but even if we broaden it out into sexual harassment or unwelcome sexual behaviour, maybe even, right? There are a lot of countries where there is that, but
and I would argue that in those countries where they are that, like in some of the African countries, that what they've gone against is they've gone against their old-fashioned ways. Exactly. And they've gone into ways which are supposedly modern ways, and then abused the women within those modern ways. What I'm saying
is, if we didn't have the culture of prostitutes and all the rest of it, and just to sort of circle back to Dr. Rachel's thinking, which is actually kind of a reasonably new logic to me, but she's all about the fact that about reconnecting with our old time and tides and who we are, right? Now, like I say, my 9-year-old self would have just laughed at this because I was such a rampant feminist at 9 years old. But if you actually think about the time and tides, right? Dr. Rachel has a theory that women shouldn't actually work for the whole of August. Mm-hmm. Right. Interesting theory. I would like to.
Absolutely. No,
I'd love to take the whole of August off, right? But what she says is that hormonally women are pre-programmed to have to when men are out to harvest, to be preparing their energy for when the harvest comes in, to be cooking and dealing with the harvest. So it's that, like, the rest period, right? So she was saying that, one of the really interesting things that Dr. Rachel says is that the heat of August and the sort of moon cycle of August and all the rest of it basically means that women should basically just sit under a sun lounger for the whole of August. I'm like, I'm so down with that.
You see, I'd love to speak with Dr. Rachel on this issue because, and I had her on the show and we spoke about various other things which were of great importance then, obviously, COVID, etc. Because what I want to look at, and what I would want to look at, because in my critical thinking one, what I actually said was for the working class woman, and I think I put it to 350 years, that there has not been a time for at least 350 odd years when they didn't work.
Well, yes, exactly. But
you're going further back, and that's the beauty of what she's done.
I'm going further back, but also what I'm saying, going back to the would your listeners like to see us like in real life? What I'm suggesting is we could actually create a blueprint for something better, couldn't we?
Absolutely.
You know, like I know we laughed at men from Mars and women from Venus, right? But the fact is, we could create a different narrative and a geopolitically intuitive narrative, right? For example, you know, when you think about, if you think about the things that the UN look at, and if you think about the things that Amnesty look at, and all the rest of it, and they always focus on the abused and the oppressed.
Yes.
There could be a vision of the world where abuse and oppression isn't there because the role of women isn't that.
Let me put it in a different way. Is the UN too Western-centric? Has it orientated what it perceives, and let's even be more specific, United States-centric? Has it not looked at the perspective from how the United States and then its Western allies look at the world and say, this is how the world should be, not taking into account how other people's societies may look at the world in a different vein and in a different matter? You know, we often talk about this idea of democracy. I don't know what it is, and we have some perception of what that can be. But, you know, the reality is it not just a sop? Is it not just a pretense? So that's what I'm saying. And Dr. Rachel's perspective on... Now, actually, I just thought about it. Dr. Germaine Greer actually said, I was wrong about 2 years back. I said women can have it all, and actually they can't. And she actually went back on quite a lot of things that she had said in the 70s and 80s about women having it all and doing everything. Because, of course, again, you're looking at the perspective of what is perceived as having made it actually, and this is where we tie back into something else that we spoke of not that long ago. We were talking about, with a very good colleague of yours, we were talking about artificial intelligence. And the reason why I'm going to bring this into play, because all the things that we've perceived to be bright and good and clever, actually we're now realizing that the artificial intelligence can do better than us. The things we've looked down on are the things that, you know, somebody doing beauty or whatever it might be, it is something that maybe the artificial intelligence cannot do. So again, if this world turns upside down, and it's a good time to look at it now, because if we do get artificial intelligence and we do get robotics the way we think we will get it, there will be, and I've no doubt about this, I know some of people I've had on the show example have said, we will create a good friend of mine in the United States who he wants me to say is on his way to wanting to be a billionaire rather than being one. But what his argument is on the show is that we will find he talked about Luddites, and I said, yeah, we would find some way to re-employ people. I actually don't think that's true. I think we will go through a period of time when people will be unemployed, and then I think is the ideal time to change how people function. The ideal time to say what you were striving for might not be right. And that what I said to you some time ago, what we said on the program, we were talking about it, about the grandmother in the United States not having to work because the grandfather could bring in enough money, because the dollar had not been devalued and his salary had not been devalued, and he could support 8 children without the wife having having to work, which you probably couldn't do in Europe, but you could do in the United States. That's now gone because now the wife has to work and everybody has to work in order to keep up with the Joneses. And those who don't wish to get it in some other way. This is the problem, I think. I think you've got a problem in that country in particular where nobody cares how you got your money as long as you have it. We see to people killing people left, right and centre to get the gold, if you will. And then in that moment, they've achieved it. They've achieved their goal. But what have you actually done for society? So my point is, as you've actually just said, shouldn't we look backwards? Shouldn't we say, what are we trying to achieve in terms of living? I just open that up to you.
Okay, I'm gonna answer this. I'm gonna answer this with the Dr. Rachel thing that she told me, which is all about allostatic load. You know what allostatic load is?
I do not. Every day's a school day. Educate me.
All right. So allostatic load is about the stress that every human has on their own body.
Okay.
Right. Whether it's the illnesses that they have, whether it's the physical exertion that they put on themselves, whether it's the stress that they put on themselves, whether it's the problems they have in life, whether it's the hormonal problems, whether it's the stage of life problems, right? Okay, so a woman's allostatic load when she reaches a 50 or whatever, or whatever age, right, is exacerbated by all of these things, but also these other sort of medical, these are the kind of menopausal issues. The white paper that we're about to put out is terrifying. I mean, it basically says 3/4 of the female workforce have said that they are going to give up their dream job because of basically said they have given up their dream job because their workplace can't accommodate their menopausal conditions, right? Now, look, 1 in 2 people one in 2 people go through the menopause, right?
Mm-hmm.
Statistically, 1 in 2 people go through cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Alarmingly,
Do you think there's a correlation?
No.
No. Okay.
What I'm saying is, alarmingly, terrifyingly, women would rather tell their line manager at work that they've got cancer than they are going through the menopause.
That's clearly a societal.
It's insane, isn't it? It's insane. It's insane. But what I'm saying to you, Carlton, is right. If we were able to, and like you just said, right, we've spoken so much about geopolitics in the landscape of war and in the landscape of retribution, I suppose, and all the rest of it, right? My response to the gender issue is something that maybe your listeners can think about. What if we were to redefine this, right? I'm a dyed-in-the-wool feminist, but what if I wasn't? What if I wasn't? What if the suffragettes, like you say, like you called out, what if the suffragettes got it all wrong? What if the real issue was actually, should women be able to, women have the ability to have children, so should that situation be nurtured in a better way? And also, what about the menopause, and should that be nurtured in a better way? And actually, I mean, I don't want to sound like men are from Mars and women are from Venus, but what if there was another world where instead of women trying to compete with every male agenda, I mean, like just look at the Nicola Sturgeon thing, right? When she stood down, I mean, obviously she had like some behind the scenes issues as to why she had to stand down, right? But when she actually stood down, right, she said that she felt like the intrusion into her personal life was was too aggressive.
Yeah.
Right. Now, look, we've said before, like, I mean, look, she did a great job.
She's the best politician by far in the United Kingdom, as far as I'm concerned.
Me too. She's like #1 hero. Like, we love her, right? I mean, you know, in the landscape of like Fergus and Carlton, like, you know, league table, there's like Meghan Markle and there's like Nicola Sturgeon, right? We can put the rest of the league table together later. I just invented this now. I only just made this up. But anyway, if there was a league table, she would definitely be in it. But all I'm saying is she sort of had to downplay a lot of things and play them off against sort of her being a weak female in order to.
You see, no, that's the problem.
But why? But all I'm saying is, why should that have to happen? Because okay, so like I say, my 9-year-old self would be like, oh my god, like Nicola Sturgeon, she should just be like whipping everyone out like Marvel superheroes. But my older self, nurtured by Dr. Rachel Taylor, I am very, very interested in this whole hypothesis about our primeval beings.
So that was part 1 of this week's Black Spy podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll have part 2 next week.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
In the quarter of a century, I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.